Hey, it's Pastor Doug, and I'm here to tell you another story. I hope that you are ready to enjoy it. Well, take that off too. Hello, it's Pastor Doug, and I'm here to tell you another story this week. But I'm going to move away from Jack just a little bit and tell you a story that I enjoy. It's one about Brer Possum. There's a whole series of tales about from Uncle Remus that has to do with Brer Rabbit. And I've always enjoyed those stories. They've always taught me a lot of good lessons. And there's one that I enjoy telling called Brer Possum, which you may or may not have heard, at least not in a long time. Well, it just so happened that Brer Possum was a getting old. Now, you know what happens when people get old. Why, they get a little bent over and they just start where they can't get going very fast. They're just slow. And he'd gotten so old and so slow, why, he just couldn't get the food that he loved to eat most of all. And the food that he loved to eat most of all was frogs. Why, he used to go up to the frog pond and he'd catch them frogs and he'd take them home, and his wife would cook them all up, and they would have the best time and they would enjoy them so much. However, when you're old and you're slow, you just can't do those things anymore. And so Brer Possum would get his frog sack and he'd get his frog stick and he'd make his way up to the frog pond, and he'd sit on an old log and he'd look out at all those frogs, and they would look at him. They'd hop up on their little lily pads and they'd say, "Nanny, nanny, boo, boo, you can't get us." Oop, they'd go back down in the water, or they'd hop up again and they'd go, "Nanny, nanny, boo, boo, you can't get us." They loved Brer Possum had gotten old and slow. Why, they was a flourishing and there were frogs all over the place. The other part about getting old and slow is that, well, someone else might get you. And so Brer Possum was always a little afraid that somebody might come up who wanted to eat a possum, and he was always a little nervous. So anytime he heard a crack in the woods or a rustle of the winds, he'd jump down and he'd get down and he'd hide and he'd do everything he could. And one time when he was listening to the frogs singing "Nanny, Nanny, Boo, Boo," why, there came a noise in the wood, a crack and a crunch and a coming out. He got down by that log and he held and he just tried to hide, and he was just afraid everything was going to be happening to him. And all of a sudden out came Brer Rabbit. Why, Brer Rabbit looked down at him and said, "Why, Brer Possum, why's you down there? What are you doing with that? Oh, don't you know it's a beautiful day? You should get up. You ought to be moving around and going around. What a wonderful day it is." Said, "Oh, it might be a wonderful day for you, Brer Rabbit, but not for me. I'm old and I'm slow and I can't eat any of those frogs no more. Every day I go back home and I stop by the trash heap and I fill my frog sack full of trash. And boy, poor Mrs. Possum, she does her best, let me tell you, but you can only eat trash so many days in a row. Why, she's got trash tetrazzini and trash tacos and trash enchiladas. We have trash loaf and trash cakes, but it all sort of tastes the same, and it's just not that good." "Oh," Brer Rabbit said, "well, let me think about that. Well, I know what you could do." Brer Rabbit was always having great ideas. He says, "Now, tomorrow, this is what you do. Now, tomorrow morning, you get your trash sack. You get it all cleaned out, so it's going to be a frog sack again." "Yes, sir, it is. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to..." Then he's just whispered him a secret. And when he got up, Brer Possum was ready and raring to go. Why, he went home that night and they had a great feast. Why, Mrs. Possum cooked up that trash like she'd never cooked it before. They just loved it down, knowing it was their last trash of a meal. And the next morning, why, Brer Possum got up early. He got up, he washed out his trash sack, he cleaned off his frog stick, and he made his way up to the frog pond. He was just going along and singing a song to himself, and he was having a lovely day. And as he got closer, he started not feeling too good, as sometimes you do when you get older, and he was sort of running out of energy by the time he got all the way up there. All that excitement had got his heart running a little too fast, I think, and he just started going further, and by the time he got up there to that frog pond, he just got up there and he just sat down on that frog log, and sure enough, those frogs come out. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo, he can't get us. Well, Brer Possum had it at that. He jumped up and he tried and he staggered over the water and he bumped in and he came back out and he ran over here and he went all over the place. But oh, Brer Possum couldn't catch one. Them frogs was hopping this way and that way, and they was going all over the place, and they was trying to get away, and he was just trying and working, and he was throwing a fit, and he was getting angry and mad, and then all of a sudden he started to stop, and he goes, oh no, oh no. Oh no, oh no, 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 no. And Brer Possum just fell right there on the sand next to the pond. And all the frogs got real quiet and still. They didn't know what to do. Why, some of them got up there on the sand and they just throwed some at him, and he didn't move. Some more got over there and touched him with his leg and tried to kick him with their flippers, but he didn't move at all. Some of them gave him a little nudge. Why, he didn't do anything. And they knew what had happened. Poor Brer Possum must have had a heart attack and died. And those frogs started celebrating. They started singing, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, he'll never get us. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo, he'll never get us. They was a singing and a dancing and having a great time when there came a tromping up through the woods. Crackle, crackle, and that got 'em all quiet. No telling who's coming up. And out came Brer Rabbit. He was ready to meet Brer Possum. He got up there and he started looking around. When he saw Brer Possum, his heart was broken. Oh, no, 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 Brer Possum, get up. Oh, he couldn't wake him up. He shook him real hard. No, not on this day. This was the day that was going to turn everything around. Oh, Brer Possum. Oh, no, my best friend in the whole wide world is dead. Oh, Brer Rabbit just sat down himself and sobbed and cried, and those frogs just was a-looking all wide-eyed, trying to figure out what was a-going on. And then they started singing, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, he'll never get us. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo, he'll never get us. And that's when, oh, poor Brer Possum just raised right up, and they moved him around, and he was just there. He couldn't try to. Brer Rabbit knew he had to do something. Said, well, maybe I had to drag him, but he couldn't get him, couldn't move before Brer Rabbit anywhere. He was just a little old rabbit. And then he finally looked out and says, oh, you frogs ought to be ashamed of yourself, singing nanny, nanny, boo, boo, poor Brer Possum right here, dead as he could be. Well, the least you could do is help me bury him. And the frogs thought about it and said, we could do that. We could do that. Why, they started coming up and they started digging out dirt around him, and Brer Possum went down a little bit, and they said, oh, that's hard work, Brer Rabbit. Is it deep enough yet? And Brer Rabbit said, oh, get out and let me see. And they hopped out, and he said, no, not deep enough yet. So they got back down there around Brer Possum, and they was throwing dirt out and throwing dirt out and throwing dirt out, and he went down a little bit more, and he was getting awful tired. And they said, oh, Brer Rabbit, is it deep enough yet? He said, hop out, let me see. They all hopped out. He says, no, it's not deep enough yet. And they got down there and they dug out more and dug out more and dug out more, and Brer Possum went further and further and further down. And then finally he was so far down, they was so tired, and they just looked all the way up and said, hey, Brer Rabbit, Is it deep enough yet? He says, oh, I don't know. Why don't you hop out and let me see? And they tried to hop out, but they couldn't get out and slid back down. They tried to hop out and they'd slide back down, and they'd hop out and they just slid back down. And that's when Brer Rabbit said, I think it's deep enough yet. What do you think, Brer Possum? And Brer Possum's eyes opened up. He looked around all them frogs. He took his frog sack, started putting them all in there, and he just couldn't believe his luck that day. Why, he went home and Mrs. Possum cooked up all kinds of frog legs and frog delicacies, and they had frog fricassee. They were going to have just one wonderful meal after another. And that's how Brer Possum learned to play possum. And he never went hungry again, because there was always a new batch of frogs that didn't know how Brer Possum could play possum. And Brer Rabbit helped him out every year, and they would get them frogs and they would put them up, and they just had a wonderful time. Now, I tell you that story because, well, we all know the nature of a possum, right? Well, when possums get scared and possums have something, well, they pretend to be dead. They play possum, but they're not really dead. That's a part of who they are. And whenever we use all those parts of who we are, we're going to be able to do all the things that we could do. And other stuff like being too old just might not get in the way, or being too young, or being too tall, or being any other kind of thing. When we use the gifts and the talents that God has given us, we're able to enjoy the life that He has. Now, I hope that you don't read too much into the story, but I do hope that you go away thinking about, I wonder what talents God has given me and how I can use them as well. And that's the end of that.